She left me for a richer guy. Thinking I'd never bounce back years later, I ended up becoming her husband's new boss. And watching her realize who's really in control was priceless. I still remember the night Melissa left me like it happened yesterday. Not because it was sudden, though it was, but because it shattered everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and myself. She had that look on her face, the one that always made people stop and stare, the perfect mixture of confidence and arrogance with just a hint of coldness. I used to think that look was reserved for her best friends or models in magazines. That night, it was aimed at me. She walked into our apartment carrying her tote bag, hair perfectly styled despite the late hour, wearing those designer boots I hated but secretly loved seeing on her. "We need to talk," she said. Her tone was casual, like she was announcing the weather. I froze, gripping the edge of the couch, trying to make sense of the world crumbling around me. I tried to make a joke, something stupid, like, "Is this about me eating the last slice of pizza?" But she didn't smile. Not a hint. Her expression was the kind of serious that doesn't forgive, doesn't wait, and doesn't bend. "No, it's not a joke, Jason," she said, dropping her bag onto the floor like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "I can't do this anymore. I can't be with someone who can't give me what I need." "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice cracking, though I didn't want it to. I wanted to be strong. I wanted to fight, but something told me the fight had already been decided behind my back. "I mean," she hesitated, searching for words, but the truth was blunt and brutal when it finally came. "I mean, someone stable, someone who can provide. I need more than this." She gestured vaguely at our apartment, our life, everything we had built together. It felt like she was erasing years of memories with a flick of her hand. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I swallowed hard, trying to find my footing in the whirlwind of disbelief. "Melissa, are you saying you're leaving me for money?" She flinched, but only slightly. "It's not just money, Jason. Ethan, he can give me the life I want. He's successful. He's established. You're amazing in so many ways, but you're not enough." That word haunted me as she walked past me, brushing her hair over her shoulder like it didn't matter that she was breaking my heart. "Enough." I repeated it over and over in my head as I sank into the couch, staring at the ceiling, hearing the faint click of her heels as she left the apartment for the last time. I didn't cry. Not that night. I just sat there, numb, staring at the empty space she left behind, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the flickering light in the corner, and the weight of my own failure pressed down on me. My friends called, texted, urged me to go out, meet someone new, move on. I didn't want to move on. I wanted to disappear. In the weeks that followed, I tried everything to cope. I buried myself in work, late nights filled with coding, freelance projects, and client calls. I spent hours scrolling through social media, watching her flaunt her new life with Ethan. Fancy dinners, weekend getaways, glamorous photos where she looked happier than she ever had with me. The jealousy was a bitter cocktail I drank every morning. I hated her. I hated Ethan. I hated myself for feeling broken. But somewhere beneath that hate, a tiny ember of defiance sparked. I knew I couldn't stay like this forever. The boy she left behind, the one she thought she destroyed, was still in there, waiting for a chance to rise. I began small, early morning runs to clear my head, reading books about business and success, learning from online courses while the world was asleep. I forced myself to focus on things I could control, my skills, my mindset, my future. Slowly, painfully, I started to rebuild. And then came the first real turning point. A client called me out of the blue, a small tech company struggling to manage their financial reports. They needed someone to automate the process, and my freelance experience put me at the top of the list. It wasn't much, just a small paycheck, but it was the first validation that I still had worth, that I could still succeed. I threw myself into the work with obsession. Late nights coding, endless debugging, presentations, client meetings. I didn't leave anything to chance. Every small success felt like a slap in the face to the memory of Melissa and her perfect life with Ethan. But I didn't just want to prove them wrong. I wanted to prove to myself that I could rise. Months turned into a year. I took on bigger projects, learned new skills, and slowly started saving money. I upgraded my apartment, bought a car, invested in my own professional growth. Every milestone felt like a small victory, but I knew the real victory would be when our paths crossed again. When she would see me, not as the boy she abandoned, but as the man who had everything she thought she wanted. I began to imagine it. Melissa standing in my office, realizing that the guy she left behind had become more than she could ever have imagined. That thought alone was intoxicating. But I didn't rush it. I knew patience was part of the plan. Revenge doesn't always come from anger, it comes from strategy. During this time, I also learned something crucial. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. I never forgot her. I never forgot Ethan. But I learned to redirect that pain into something productive. I learned that bitterness could be a tool, not a weapon against others, but a fuel to rebuild yourself. And so I rebuilt, piece by piece, project by project, night after night. I didn't just want to bounce back, I wanted to soar. I wanted a life so full and undeniable that no one, not even Melissa, could look at me without feeling the weight of what they had lost. By the end of that year, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. Freelance projects turned into a small business, a co-working space, new contacts, and opportunities I had never dreamed of before. I still thought about Melissa, but now it was different. The pain was no longer the center of my universe. It was a reminder of why I couldn't settle, why I had to push harder, why I couldn't let life pass me by. And deep down, I knew the day would come when we would cross paths again. I didn't know where or when, but I knew it would happen. And when it did, I wanted her to see me. Not just successful, but untouchable in a way that only comes from someone who has clawed their way back from the edge. That night, sitting alone in my apartment, I raised a glass to the future. Not to revenge, not to spite, but to the power of reclaiming your life. Melissa may have left me for someone richer, someone better, but little did she know I was just getting started. And this time, when our paths crossed again, the tables would turn in ways she couldn't even imagine. The months after Melissa left were hell in some ways, but they were also the most important months of my life. I realized that bouncing back wasn't just about getting over her. It was about creating a life she couldn't even dream of. The kind of life where success wasn't measured by money alone, but by control, confidence, and respect. It all started with a small idea. I'd been freelancing for a while, taking on projects that barely paid the rent, but each one taught me something: client management, negotiation, coding efficiency. I met Marcus at a co-working space downtown, a guy who looked like he had stepped out of a startup poster, messy hair, ripped jeans, a perpetual caffeine buzz. He had a brain that was practically a lightning storm, ideas sparking faster than most people could follow. "I'm telling you, Jason," Marcus said one evening, sprawled across two chairs like he owned the place, "there's a market for automation nobody's touching yet. Small businesses are drowning in reports, spreadsheets, receipts. It's a nightmare. If we do this right, we can corner that niche before anyone notices." I listened, skeptical at first. We were both broke, living on instant noodles and dreams, but something about his energy was contagious. For the first time since Melissa left, I felt alive. Not heartbroken, not bitter, just capable. We started small. Nights blurred into mornings as we coded, tested, argued over design, and recoded. We used my tiny apartment as our office at first, the couch doubling as a brainstorming corner and the kitchen table as our workspace. Marcus would pace back and forth while I typed furiously, sometimes muttering to myself, sometimes throwing a pen across the room in frustration. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't easy, but it was mine. Every line of code, every business pitch, every client email, it was a step toward proving something, not just to the world, but to myself. Our first client was a small local bakery. They were drowning in spreadsheets, tracking inventory and sales. Within a week, we had automated their report system. The owner, a sweet lady named Mrs. Hawkins, hugged me and said, "I don't know how to thank you, Jason. You've saved my business." I smiled, feeling a small surge of pride. That was the moment I realized something important. This wasn't just about money or revenge, it was about impact. By the end of that year, we had a handful of clients and our small operation was starting to gain attention. I upgraded my apartment, got a modest car, and, most importantly, I felt a shift inside me. The numbness, the bitterness, the endless nights of staring at the ceiling, they were fading. What remained was focus, drive, purpose. But it wasn't just financial growth that mattered. I learned to network, to negotiate, to present myself in ways that demanded respect. Conferences, meetups, random encounters with industry people. I absorbed it all, like a sponge hungry for knowledge. Every time someone underestimated me because of my past or my age or my previous failures, it lit a fire in me. 2 years in, our company officially launched as a startup with a sleek office downtown. We had 30 employees, a growing client base, and contracts that were finally substantial enough to make me realize we were playing in a league far beyond what I'd imagined when Melissa walked out. I could finally afford the life I wanted. Not for her, not for anyone, but for me. And then came the first inkling that our worlds might collide again. At a tech networking event, I overheard someone talking about a company that had been struggling with a software overhaul. The name, Warner Enterprises, Melissa's husband, Ethan. My chest tightened, not from anger, but anticipation. I didn't chase it immediately. I had learned patience. I didn't need to confront them to prove anything. I just had to build until it was inevitable. Their paths would cross mine on my terms. As the startup grew, I noticed changes in myself too. Confidence seeped into every corner of my life. I walked taller, spoke sharper, smiled without forcing it. I wasn't the same guy who sat alone on a couch staring at the ceiling after a breakup. I was someone who had clawed his way back from nothing and now stood firmly in control of his life. Even friendships evolved. Marcus became more than a business partner. He was my anchor, my sounding board, my brother in arms. And slowly, I stopped thinking about Melissa every day. Not because I didn't care, God knows the memory of her stung, but because my life had become bigger than resentment. Success, I realized, was the most silent, yet most effective revenge. By the third year, we were attracting attention from investors, and our software was becoming a must-have for small and mid-sized companies. The idea that Melissa had left me for stability now seemed almost laughable. I was stable, more than stable. I was thriving, and soon enough I would encounter her again. And this time, the balance of power would be unmistakably clear. And I wasn't going to gloat, not yet. The thrill was in the inevitability, in knowing that the tables would turn without me having to say a single word. One evening, late at the office, I paused, looking out over the city's skyline. Lights flickered in tall buildings, cars moved like veins through the streets below, and for the first time, I felt like I wasn't just surviving, I was untouchable. Melissa may have walked away thinking she'd won, but she had no idea what was coming. And when the moment finally arrived, she would realize something even more important than my success. I had control now. It happened sooner than I expected. I had been invited to a tech conference in downtown Chicago, a massive event with investors, startup founders, and industry leaders buzzing around, everyone trying to pitch, network, or just look like they belonged. I was there to promote our latest software update, the one that had been months in the making and was already causing competitors to take notice. I adjusted my blazer, sipped my overpriced conference coffee, and walked into the lobby, mentally rehearsing the key talking points for my presentation. I barely had time to register the sea of faces before I froze. Melissa, she was there, in the middle of a crowd, still impossibly beautiful, hair flowing perfectly over her shoulders, designer heels clicking against the polished marble floor. She wasn't alone. Ethan, that smug, rich guy who had stolen her from me 3 years ago. My chest tightened, my heart raced, not with anger, but with anticipation. I had imagined this moment countless times, but now it was real. The way they stood together, hand almost brushing, laughing at something someone said, reminded me of a memory I had tried to forget. The night she left, the better life she had chosen. I forced myself to focus. I wasn't there to confront them, not yet. I had work to do, meetings to run, investors to impress, but every step I took, every smile I offered to someone else felt like a silent statement. I had moved on. I had become more than they ever expected. Melissa's eyes caught mine first. It was a fleeting moment, a spark that lasted maybe a second, but it was enough. Recognition, surprise, something unreadable but unmistakable. She looked unsettled, not scared, not intimidated, but caught off guard. Ethan, on the other hand, didn't notice me immediately. He was too wrapped up in his own ego, too used to being the center of attention. But once his gaze shifted, I saw the flicker of something he wasn't expecting. Caution, unease. I smiled politely at a few people around me, keeping my posture casual, letting the subtle tension settle into the space between us. I didn't approach them, didn't make a scene. I let them notice me. Let them process that the boy Melissa had walked out on had grown into a man who didn't just survive, he thrived. The conference went on, but their presence lingered like a shadow. Every conversation I had, every handshake, every pitch was colored by the knowledge that they were here, somewhere in the same room, completely unaware of the storm I represented. Later, during a coffee break, I caught Melissa standing by the refreshments table. She glanced up, and for the first time, I noticed subtle differences. Her perfect composure was faltering. The laugh that used to be so easy now seemed rehearsed, a little too bright. She wasn't used to uncertainty, and I could see it in the slight crease of her brow, the hesitation in her movements. I wanted to say something, anything, but I didn't. Part of the thrill was in watching her figure it out herself, watching her realize, without me saying a word, that the guy she left behind was no longer vulnerable, no longer dependent, no longer the same person she thought she knew. I moved on, attended my meetings, pitched our product flawlessly, signed a few key investors, but all the while, Melissa's presence lingered in my peripheral vision, a constant reminder of why I had built everything I had. She had been the catalyst, the unwitting motivator behind every sleepless night, every risk I'd taken, every milestone I had achieved. By the end of the day, as the conference wrapped up and people spilled out into the bustling streets, I caught one last glimpse of her. Melissa was walking beside Ethan, laughing at something he said, but the look she gave me, fleeting, barely perceptible, was enough. She was beginning to process the reality. The tables had shifted, and the world she thought she controlled had moved on without her. I didn't chase her. I didn't need to. The first encounter was enough to remind me that the real power wasn't in confrontation, it was in inevitability. They were entering my world, my terms, and soon, the consequences of that would become painfully clear. And for the first time, I allowed myself a small, private smile. This wasn't about revenge. Not exactly. It was about seeing life unfold the way it was meant to. Seeing Melissa realize, slowly, that the boy she left behind had become a man she could never underestimate. That night, walking back to my apartment, I reflected on everything that had happened since she left. The heartbreak, the struggle, the relentless grind. It had all led to this moment. The seed of my success had been planted in the soil of my pain, and now it was flourishing, growing faster than either of them could imagine. Melissa and Ethan thought they had won. They thought they had control. They were wrong. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to confront them directly. I just needed to keep building, keep thriving, and wait for the moment when the full weight of my success would hit them. And I knew that day would come sooner than they expected. It didn't take long for the opportunity to present itself. A few months after that fateful tech conference, I received an email that made my pulse quicken without a single word of malice in it. Subject: Business Proposal, Warren Enterprises. At first, I almost deleted it, thinking it was spam, but the sender was legitimate. Warner Enterprises, a mid-sized company that had been struggling with their software infrastructure, was seeking a tech partner for a complete overhaul. The sender requested a meeting. When the receptionist said, "Mr. Ethan Warner will see you now," I felt a familiar flash of adrenaline. Ethan, the man who had stolen Melissa from me, the man who had lived in the glow of wealth and privilege while I clawed my way back from nothing. I didn't feel anger, not really. I felt anticipation. This wasn't about petty revenge, it was about strategy. I wasn't here to humiliate anyone, I was here to win. And the first rule of winning, never show your hand too soon. The meeting took place in a spacious, overly decorated conference room. Leather chairs, polished oak table, abstract art on the walls. Ethan sat at the head, crisp suit, perfectly groomed. Melissa sat beside him, portfolio open, projecting professionalism. My stomach twisted, not from fear, but from the sheer satisfaction of being here, on my terms. I laid out our proposal, my voice calm, confident, precise. I highlighted inefficiencies in their current systems, potential risks, and exactly how my company could streamline operations, cut costs, and improve productivity. I didn't attack Ethan's leadership directly, but the subtext was clear. They needed me. Ethan's confidence started to falter almost immediately. The first subtle crack appeared when he asked about integrating legacy systems, expecting me to hem and haw. Instead, I provided a clear, step-by-step solution, using examples from companies I had already helped. He scribbled notes, lips pressed tight, a tiny bead of sweat forming near his temple. Melissa, on the other hand, tried to maintain composure. She asked technical questions, probed our methodology, but the hesitation in her eyes betrayed her. She recognized the difference. The guy she left for 3 years ago, her rich, stable choice, was suddenly outclassed by the person he thought he had discarded. I didn't gloat, not allowed. I didn't need to. The room itself became the proof. Charts, data, projections, client testimonials, they all screamed competence. Ethan was forced to admit, without words, that he was out of his depth. Melissa noticed too, and I could see the gears turning in her head. I miscalculated. After an hour of presentations, technical discussions, and subtle power plays, the deal was finalized. I didn't rub it in, didn't make a single personal comment. I simply shook hands, smiled politely, and left the room. But inside, a private, delicious thrill coursed through me. The tables were turning. Slowly, inevitably, the balance of power was shifting. Over the following weeks, I became the go-to expert for Warner Enterprises. Ethan's role shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly, from decision maker to someone reliant on my expertise. Melissa tried to maintain her professional poise, but the signs of discomfort were everywhere. Hesitant emails, double-checking reports, subtle questioning in meetings. It was fascinating to watch, not out of malice, but out of a sense of satisfaction that comes from seeing life align with its natural course. The boy she left behind had become a man who didn't just succeed. He commanded respect. The real thrill came one afternoon during a routine project review. Melissa walked into my temporary office, portfolio in hand, looking as composed as ever. "Jason," she said, voice measured, "I wanted your input on the new workflow. I think there might be a better way to integrate it with the client database." I nodded, leaning back in my chair, keeping my tone professional but firm. "I've reviewed it. The current plan maximizes efficiency and minimizes risk. I'd advise following it exactly as outlined. Her lips pressed together and I could see her processing it. The subtle shift in her demeanor was intoxicating. She realized she wasn't the one in control anymore. She couldn't dominate the conversation, couldn't override the plan without consequences. She had underestimated me once, and now the reality was settling in. By the end of the day, Ethan's anxiety was more apparent. Melissa tried to mask it, but the little signs were everywhere. The subtle hesitation before speaking, the careful phrasing of questions, the constant need to verify my suggestions. I didn't have to say a word about the past. The present was loud enough. Sitting in my apartment later that night, I reflected on the progress. Everything had gone according to plan. The universe had handed me the opportunity to reclaim my power, not through revenge, but through excellence. And watching Melissa realize it, without a single insult or confrontation, was more satisfying than I could have imagined. The game wasn't over, not by a long shot, but the first pieces were in place and soon the full weight of the new reality would hit both of them. I had control now, and this time there was no turning back. By the time the new quarter rolled around, my position at Warner Enterprises was solid. My team had successfully implemented the software overhaul, streamlining operations, reducing errors, and saving the company a small fortune. Ethan, who had once strutted around with unearned confidence, now came to me for approval on nearly every major decision. Melissa was the hardest to read. On the surface, she maintained her professionalism, carrying herself with the same polished demeanor she had always perfected. But the subtle cracks were impossible to miss if you paid attention. The slight hesitation before asking a question, the rapid glances at reports she didn't fully understand, the micro expressions that betrayed uncertainty. I wasn't cruel. I didn't humiliate her, didn't mock the way some might have in a storybook revenge scenario. Instead, I allowed the environment, the undeniable proof of my success, to speak for itself. I let her watch the shift unfold naturally. It was during one particular meeting that it hit me. The moment she truly understood. The conference room was large, glass walls overlooking the city skyline, sunlight streaming in and glinting off polished surfaces. Ethan was presenting financial projections to a few board members when Melissa interrupted, politely, with a question about system integration. I think it would be safer if we double-checked the revenue tracking module, she said, her voice steady but with just the slightest trace of nervousness. Ethan nodded, looking to me for guidance. His eyes, for the first time in years, betrayed uncertainty. I've reviewed it thoroughly, I said calmly, projecting authority without aggression. The system is functioning exactly as designed. Altering it now would introduce unnecessary risk. Melissa's lips pressed together. That slight, almost imperceptible pause. The moment she realized I wasn't just competent but untouchable was like a spark lighting the final piece of the puzzle in her mind. She had underestimated me once, and now the truth was undeniable. She wasn't in control anymore. For weeks afterward, I observed her subtle adjustments in behavior. She started double-checking her emails, hesitant to override decisions, more inclined to seek guidance before acting. Every interaction was professional, yet I could sense the internal struggle. Pride, battling recognition of reality. One afternoon, Melissa scheduled a private meeting with me. She walked in, portfolio clutched tightly, eyes avoiding direct contact at first. "Jason," she began, her voice measured, "I wanted to get your advice on something. The client's implementation timeline. I'm not sure if our approach is the most efficient." I leaned back in my chair, meeting her gaze evenly. "The timeline we've proposed maximizes efficiency while mitigating risk. I'd advise sticking to it. Any changes now could compromise results." Her reaction was subtle but telling. A slow inhale, a slight tightening of her shoulders, the momentary falter before she nodded. She understood. She realized she had stepped into a world where I held authority, expertise, and undeniable control. And the look in her eyes, a mix of respect, shock, and perhaps a hint of regret, was priceless. It was fascinating to watch. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to remind her of the past. The power shift was clear in the way she behaved, in the way Ethan deferred to my suggestions, in the way board members turned to me for guidance. And yet, there was no malice in my actions. The satisfaction came from the truth of the situation, from the inevitability of it. Melissa had walked away thinking she was choosing stability, comfort, and control. But in chasing a shortcut, she had underestimated someone who refused to remain broken. I realized something important during that period. True power doesn't come from revenge or spite. It comes from self-mastery, competence, and consistency. Watching Melissa slowly internalize that reality was simply a byproduct of the life I had built. One evening, after a particularly intense day of meetings, I stepped out onto the office balcony. The city lights stretched endlessly, a reminder of how far I'd come. I thought about the nights I had spent alone, consumed with heartbreak, dreaming of a life that seemed impossible. And here I was, standing at the peak of what I had envisioned, watching the world, and the people who had doubted me, adjust to the reality of my success. Melissa hadn't expected this. Ethan hadn't expected this. And neither had I. When I was at my lowest, could have imagined how sweet the satisfaction of unspoken recognition would be. I smiled to myself, a private, knowing smile. The boy she left behind was gone. The man who replaced him was not only thriving, but in control of his life, his career, and, in some ways, the very people who had once dismissed him. And that realization for Melissa would be impossible to ignore. The final stage of the game wasn't flashy. It didn't require dramatic confrontations, yelling matches, or public humiliation. Power, I had learned, was far more effective when it was subtle, undeniable, and invisible until it hit. By the time the last major project with Warner Enterprises wrapped up, the dynamics were clear. I wasn't just a consultant or contractor anymore. I was effectively running the operations Ethan had once thought he controlled. Every recommendation I made, every plan I implemented, every client presentation I led carried weight. And the interesting part? Melissa, who had always been so poised and confident, had started to adapt her behavior. She no longer questioned me openly. She no longer assumed she had authority here. She watched, calculated, and learned, because for the first time she realized that someone she thought she understood was completely untouchable. It was during a quarterly board meeting that everything became undeniable. The conference room was filled with executives, investors, and key team members. Ethan had been slated to lead the meeting, but the agenda had shifted subtly over time. Questions came to me first. Decisions were deferred to my judgment. I didn't have to assert myself. The structure of the meeting itself spoke louder than any words could. Melissa raised her hand once, politely, to ask a question about a report. I answered with precise detail, then suggested a slight adjustment to improve efficiency. She nodded quickly, jotting notes, her lips pressed tight. The micro-expression on her face, a mix of disbelief, realization, and maybe the faintest twinge of regret, did not escape me. Ethan tried to interject at one point, but I addressed his point calmly, methodically, and with clarity that left no room for debate. He leaned back in his chair, jaw tight, realizing that control was no longer his domain. The smug confidence he had relied on for so long was gone, replaced by a new respect that neither of them could ignore. After the meeting, Melissa stayed behind under the pretense of discussing workflow improvements. The room was quiet, just the two of us. She glanced at the reports I had prepared, then at me, and finally said, her voice soft, "Jason, I didn't realize. I knew you were successful, but I didn't understand." I met her gaze steadily, letting the silence stretch. I didn't finish her sentence. I didn't need to. The meaning was clear. You're in control. You're the one running this now. "Yes," I said finally, voice calm and measured. "I am, and everything has been built the right way, strategically, efficiently, professionally. No shortcuts." Her shoulders slumped just slightly, a subtle surrender to the truth she had been avoiding. She looked at Ethan's office across the hall, probably realizing for the first time that the life she had chosen for stability had led her to a world where she wasn't even close to the one in control. Melissa's realization wasn't about spite or revenge. It was about clarity. She saw what I had become, what I had built, and how the choices she had made years ago had underestimated the man she once thought she could discard. And Ethan, he had begun to understand too. The uncomfortable truth was clear. The person he had thought was beneath him, the one he assumed would remain in the shadows of failure, was now the person orchestrating the company's success. The man Melissa had left was now the one holding the reins. For me, the satisfaction wasn't in gloating. It wasn't in mockery. It was the subtle, undeniable triumph of life correcting itself. The heartbreak that had once consumed me had been transformed into strength, strategy, and unwavering focus. Watching Melissa come to terms with that silently was the most rewarding part of the journey. Months later, as I walked past the executive offices, I overheard Melissa giving instructions, hesitating slightly and then deferring to my recommendations. She was competent, professional, capable, but she understood, finally, who was truly in control. And the smile I allowed myself that day wasn't one of malice. It was quiet, self-satisfied, and victorious. I had survived heartbreak. I had rebuilt from nothing. And I had achieved something far more powerful than revenge. I had achieved undeniable control over my life, my career, and indirectly, the people who had doubted me most. Melissa had left me thinking she'd won. Ethan had assumed he was untouchable. But in the end, reality had a way of correcting itself. And I was exactly where I belonged. At the top, in control, untouchable.